Hey!
Hey.
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 Welcome to Drunk Queer Bitches Talk Books. I'm your host today, Tony, and I'm joined by our usual bitches. I'm Tony, the nerdy one.
I'm Adam, the sassy one.
I'm Jared, the quirky one.
And I'm Erin, the lesbian.
The hors d'oeuvres are laid out, and the mimosas have been poured. This month, we read a science fiction book. To that end, we selected Consider Phlebas by Iain M. Spoiler warning, since this will be a discussion of the book, there will be discussion of the plot, potentially all the way up to the end of the story. So, spoiler warning, pause, read it, come back, and listen to our take. Since this is our first episode, I'm going to turn you over to Jared and Erin to discuss the origin of our podcast.
All right, so for the past 2 years, I have been doing the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge, which was a lot of fun, but also super time-consuming, and did not leave me a lot of time to read the books that I actually wanted to listen to.
For the past 2 years, I've been failing at the Pop Sugar Challenge.
That is true. Every year I was told that I would have compatriots, and every year they all bowed out on me, so I was the ultimate victor. But anyway... So I was discussing it with Jared one day, and he decided that, maybe instead of doing the reading challenge every year, that he and I could just read one book a month and kind of get together and talk about it. And then that was mentioned to Adam, and then that was mentioned to Tony, and somehow it turned into this shit show. Jared, would you have anything to add?
I mean, you pretty much got everything. Basically what happened is you and I got together. We wanted to just goof around and talk about books. We decided, hey, let's be professional about it, and we grabbed a couple more gays and decided to record.
And became completely unprofessional. And back to you in the studios.
Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Pop Sugar Challenge, the idea is it gives you a list of 40 books, and each one is a
40
different...
topics.
Right, 40 topics.
Unless you're a go-getter, and then they give you one every week of the year.
Yeah, like the 2017 last year, they added an advanced reading section of 12 extra books, so 52, one for each week. Yeah, that did not happen. I got my 40, and then I said, fuck it.
Side note, I failed that too.
So it's a list of different topics, different categories, different genres and subgenres. So we wanted to play with that for the idea of the podcast. We wanted to take a list, create a list of categories, and then find books to apply to it. Largely for the same reasons as the Pop Sugar Challenge, to get us out of our comfort zone. Because we all have our niche genres, our niche topics. So we wanted to expose each other to different kinds of reading and literature.
Some of us haven't read a book in a year or two, so...
And some of us are reading 5 books at once. Hey!
And some of us have a pile that will never be gotten to.
So to that end, we made a list of topics, subgenres, genres, and the first one we had since January 2nd is Science Fiction Day, based on the birthday of Isaac Asimov, as it should be. We decided to go with a science fiction book for our first month. And so since I'm the resident science fiction nerd of the group, that it was handed over to me to select a book for this month. So I selected Consider Phlebas by Iain M. I picked this book because I've read one other book in the series, and I enjoyed that one, and I was really curious about what else has gone on in this series, because what I read was I believe it was the third one in the series, Use of Weapons, and it was really interesting based on its structure. It was kind of weird, so I was curious what another book set in the same universe was going to be like, and since I wanted to expose you guys to some kind of space opera story, I decided to grab the first book that he wrote in the Culture series so that we could read it all and discuss that.
Well, actually, we voted, and if you'll remember...
This is a democracy.
Okay. Aaron voted for a space opera.
Okay, if you want to be technical... Well, right. I asked you guys to narrow down a more specific subgenre, because I said, well, I've never read a... Cyberpunk.
That was my vote.
I was like, I've never really read a classic cyberpunk. So I'm like, we could do a space opera or a cyberpunk, and you guys picked space opera. So, and I had Consider Phlebas already selected as the space opera. So, okay, so we wrote a synopsis of the story, but it's 4 pages long. So we're going to put that on our social media so you guys can read it if you want to read it over. Just the summary, if you don't get a chance to read the full novel before you want to listen to our podcast. So I'm going to just read for you the Goodreads synopsis, just so you have a good rundown of what takes place in the story. The war raged across the galaxy. Billions had died, billions more were doomed. Moons, planets, the very stars themselves faced destruction. Cold-blooded, brutal, and worse, random. The Adirans fought for their faith, the culture for its moral right to exist. Principles were at stake. there could be no surrender. Within the cosmic conflict, an individual crusade. Deep within the fabled labyrinth on a buried world, a planet of the dead prescribed to mortals, lay a fugitive mind. Both the culture and the adherents sought it, and it was the fate of Horza, the Changer, and his motley crew of unpredictable mercenaries, human and machine, to find it, and with it their own destruction.
Why will?
So, the story takes place in the... it's part of the Culture series, so it's this shared universe that is tied together with the idea of the Culture Society. The Culture is a enormous civilization populated mostly by humans and sentient drones, and it's administered and controlled by minds, which are these massive AIs that control everything and are brilliant beyond all reason. Although it's implied that there are still some humans that are a little bit, not necessarily smarter, but can reach better conclusions.
It's not implied, it's not what it's stated.
Huh?
And
It is.
I said
Well, it's stated, but there's still some ambiguity about it, because they said it still could just be chance. Because it said there's so many people in the culture.
statistically, yeah.
Yeah, it says there are over 18 trillion humans in the culture. And so, like, with the chance, it's saying that since there are so many people in the culture, if you just flip a coin randomly...
Enough times.
Yeah, like, some subset of those people will still get heads for a very long amount of time. So there are human beings that might just always by chance be right.
It's the monkeys writing Shakespeare theory, basically.
Right. There's the culture so that shows you just how big the culture is that there's this understanding that certain events, even certain unlikely events, will eventually happen in the culture. It's just so large. And so there are these referrer characters. We only meet one of them in the story, who just get asked questions on like their take on whatever problem the culture is trying to solve at the time. But like I said, there's trillions of human beings. It doesn't say how many drones there are, but it says there's hundreds of thousands of these mind AIs that do everything from like run the cities to the starships. The culture is described as kind of amorphous and vague. It's it kind of actively resists being defined kind of on paper, which is strange because some of the characters like where's the little drone that you meet halfway through?
Unaha Clasp.
Yeah, that one. Because he talks about the legality of his existence. Like, he wants to join and be an official member of the culture. He's still paying off a generational debt.
Creation debt.
So that sounds
basically.
like there's a lot of legality in the culture. But at the same time, they talk about how the culture is kind of anarchy-ish and kind of lawless at the same time. But because this society is so far advanced that there's really no needs, that you can kind of be anarchy and lawless without...
Anarchic.
I actually wrote anarchic, but that sounds strange when I try to say it. Because the society is so advanced and it's post-scarcity, you can be anarchic and lawless without any real consequences. So one of the major themes in the Culture series is the idea of interference. Because the culture has taken it upon themselves to be like the moralistic people in the universe who are interfering with the smaller societies to try to help them. And so that's a major theme in both the book we just read and the book I read before, The Use of Weapons, is it a really a good thing that the culture is interfering in these other societies? To that end, they have what would be, I guess, their equivalent of a government department, if you can have a government department in something as non-defined as the culture, called Contact, which is all about, it's their foreign relations, basically, their foreign relations department that mediates the interactions with these other societies, and they have a subset of Contact called Special Circumstances, which is basically their Black Ops department. And they're the Special Circumstances agents who will do the dirty work that the culture doesn't want to admit happens. But the culture is mostly made up of humans, which is weird.
So that's something I would say, I would stop using the word humans. That drove me crazy, and I think you
Right.
said the same thing. They're humanoids.
They're humanoids, yeah. The
Well, I
author,
used human-esque, but yeah.
the narrator uses the word human synonymously with
Which is
humanoid.
why, actually, one of my first notes when I was doing the book was, like, questioning what exactly Horza was, because I was like, so are changers human? Or are they just considered human? And it got explained later,
Right.
but, like, it was really confusing at the beginning.
Yeah, like when they were like, oh, Yeltsin has down on her, I was like, what? Like,
Which I used in my lesbian subtext. I was like, oh, body hair, feminism,
Yeah,
got this.
so human in this series is like an archetype. And
So
there
is it
are
basically
variations
anything that's
on
not
human.
that's got like
Not a- yeah.
pedalish.
Yeah, anything that has 2 arms, 2 legs,
And it's not a
2
machine.
eyes, a nose, and a mouth, basically.
Okay.
And even that, there's some
Which
ambiguity
is clear,
about.
It's clear later in the book, but at the beginning I was really confused about
Yeah, that really confused me when I read the other book, because it does the same thing. They just call him straight up human. And I'm reading it, like, there's no mention of Earth at all. And I'm like, there's no discussion of humans as we know them.
Right.
So, yeah, to put it in that larger setting, it's mentioned towards the end in the appendices that this actually takes place in the past. The whole book takes place in what would be our, like, I think it says 1331 AD. Yeah. So the appendices are like this part that are written for humans to read later when humans, I guess, encounter contact. So the story takes place in the past, and humans as we know them really aren't involved. Humans as we know them aren't really involved, and Earth as we know it isn't really involved in this story until you get to the appendice.
I'm sure we don't realize how many noises we make until, like, you hear them all in a recording. Like,
let it not be said that I didn't advocate for a sound studio.
You
My
are going to be
fucking
hearing
God.
so much about that chair squeaking in this, I'm pretty
What
sure.
chair?
Like, the
I
chair
can
that
read
I'm
the
sitting
reviews
on.
now.
Okay, the sound studio would not stop the chair from squeaking.
I know.
So,
It would just deaden the sound.
how would it deaden the sound?
Because it wouldn't be bouncing off your walls.
If you want to buy a little tent, Tony, go for it.
I might just.
I'm gonna go ahead
Well,
and
we're-
chew this while we're.
While we're yelling at each other.
I mean, you know you want to keep that. So you know you want to keep that.
Outtakes, part 4.
So as I said, this society is post-scarcity. There's a quote here that I like, that I highlighted, that I think gives you a good idea of what the culture society is like. The culture saw itself as being a self-consciously rational society, and machines, even sentient ones, were more capable of achieving these desired states, as well as more efficient at using it once it had. That was good enough for the culture. Besides, it left the humans in the culture free to take care of things that really mattered in life, such as sports, games, romance, studying dead languages, barbarian societies and impossible problems, and climbing high mountains without the aid of a safety harness.
I almost wondered if that was sarcastic. Like,
I mean, it was
think about-
sarcastic, but at the same time, it's one of those, like, it's said in jest, but it's kind of true. Because they actually say that in the other book I read, where there's a human doing a task, and the SC agent who's talking to that human is like, why are you doing this? A machine could just do it. And he's like, well, because I want to feel useful.
Isn't there like a
Ouch.
famous quote that's something like, you know, like what separates humans from animals, and it's like they're like art or whatever. So
I'm sure there is.
there's a
Opposable
quote.
thumbs.
There's a quote for anything you want to say, basically.
So, since it is this post-scarcity society, my description of the culture was kind of as this ultimate liberal socialist utopia. But is it true to say it's socialist if it is post-scarcity? Because the whole idea of socialism, I would say, without being an economist, is that you're spreading the wealth around to...
But if you don't have to worry about that,
Right.
then...
In this society, there's no limitation on wealth, essentially. So is it really socialist if
Well, maybe
it
it's...
doesn't need to be spread around?
That's probably the closest thing we can compare it to in our
In our own reality,
own reality.
Since
Like,
we're not
people
post-scarcity.
understand socialism, so, like...
It's more like utopian.
Right, like I called it utopian socialist, but is it even technically socialist?
Whatever.
I feel like, though, if you say socialist, though, people will know what you're talking about,
right.
so...
I found it in my, like, when I envisioned how he was writing all of this to be, like, for some reason, I envisioned the entirety of the world kind of in sepia tones. Like, I envision everything being very, like, brown and tan and not very colorful in any way.
Interesting. I did not, but I can see...
Because throughout
Oh,
the
that
whole thing,
can-
there wasn't very mention of, like, explicit colors.
You know, I also noticed he never meant, like, he very rarely said, like, left and right, and there wasn't, like, a lot of, like, explication of bodies, because, like, there were so many times where it's like, well, where's his finger get, like, eaten off of? Was it his left hand or his right hand? We don't know, because they never told us, like,
That didn't occur to me.
yeah.
Very nondescript.
But also,
So for a book that has a lot of description, there was also
It didn't
not
say-
a lot of description.
in human terms.
It didn't
Yeah.
say which
Or
hand he pulled
censored
free. I
term.
thought it did.
Lot of
I'm
useless
pretty sure didn't he just,
description.
like, I remember, like, noticing, I was like, so, like, does he just, like, not use the words left and right? And then eventually later he did, but I was like, it's weird, he didn't say, like, his left pinky, or what is the cute little British term that they use? Like, it wasn't little finger, it was, like, anyway.
I always think it's interesting when you have a story. It's like the classic like God problem, of evil, where like if God is perfect, God is all powerful, God is benevolent, then why are there any problems? And you kind of get that with something like the culture. Everything in the culture, because it's manipulated by these minds who are supposed to know almost everything and can process and can predict almost any outcome. Everything should be perfect. So you kind of have to create problems in the context of the story. Like, you have to introduce this massive outside force, like the Adirans, to shake things up in the culture. And even like in the story, we're not really in the culture for the story, because the culture is just going to be too perfect. It wouldn't be interesting. Like, we're actually taking place in the fringes, where these are these lesser societies, where these free companies are doing all their dirty work, where the SC agents are doing their dirty work to try to help, quote unquote, these other societies. So I thought that was interesting in the setting, is that you had to kind of create issues outside the culture, because there's not really any plot going on inside the culture itself.
That's true. So I think that leads us pretty well into a discussion of the plot. And I think, like, just from my point of view, like, when you actually look at the scope of the Adiran culture war, what we were experiencing as part of it in this book was very insignificant. And frankly, I don't know what actual impact it had on the war. Like, they never say, like, oh, well, you know, like, Balvita finding that mine was, like, really the decisive whatever. Like, no. Like,
yeah, that's true. It really was kind of inconsequential, wasn't it, to the ultimate war effort?
But that's life, isn't it? Like,
and it did specifically say that the war was over 40 years long, and wasn't this only 6 years into it?
Something like that. It was pretty early.
So
like,
this
before,
is the majority of the war still hasn't even happened yet.
It was before they started fighting back, because everyone keeps mentioning, like, oh, they're running away.
They're on the retreat, yeah.
But that gives it, like, a hint of realism.
yeah, because in our wars, like, people do things that matter to them, but ultimately don't matter to the larger cause all the time. Like,
right, and it's really unrealistic in other books of, even in this genre of sci-fi, where it's this one person who, it's all that matters, this person's gonna save the entire universe themselves. That's super unrealistic. Like, that never happens.
It's true. There's a lot of, like, hero fiction out there, you know, that we have this template of.
I mean, there's something to be said for both types of stories, so...
I just want to acknowledge, like, I made a note that, like, this story was basically like, oh, so am I reading, like, the side novel to this very successful series? That's almost what it felt like. Like, I was reading a spin-off.
The war was really just trappings and setting. It wasn't really... Like, this wasn't about a battle in the war. And actually, like, to put that in even, like, more context, the war itself was almost insignificant in the end, because he specifically says in the appendices that it was a small, short war that rarely extended throughout more than 0.02% of the galaxy by volume, and 0.01% by stellar population. So even in the end of the novel, he's like, this story didn't matter to the war, and then the war didn't matter to the galaxy.
And that's the way
It's just kind of
the world goes, I suppose.
In general, this was, like, kind of a bleak book, like, I think, because
that's true.
the ending, like, it worked really hard to subvert closure, I thought. Well, because, you know, like...
Well, yeah, because I remember getting close to the end of the book, and I'm like, I know this is almost over. Are they going to wrap anything up here? Like, and then they kind of did, kind of didn't.
Right. They did, like, the movie ending, like... Where are they now?
Yeah, like
what happened to them?
The print that appears on screen at the end of the movie. It was like with the little pictures. This person, yeah.
Like all 5 characters that were alive at the end.
The Breakfast Club ending.
We did that in It, too.
But yeah, it was just kind of, like, weird because, you know, you follow this vaguely unsympathetic asshole for, like, 400 pages, and then at the end, like, oh, he dies, and his mission was basically pointless. So...
Welcome to the real world, kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. I understand what you're saying. Like, I agree. Although, talking about the ending, like, when I was reading it, one of my favorite phrases of all time came into my head, and that's the joke, right, that everybody makes, rocks fall, everybody dies. That's essentially how this book ended.
I was thinking that when you all were talking about
Yeah, it really was. Very, very Hamlet.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the rock star everyone dies. I was like,
Oh, just like
Rose Red.
everyone dies in the end, almost.
Although I do have to say that I really enjoyed Unaha Klosp's ending. I found it really amusing
Charming.
that there is a retired robot with hobbies. I love the thought of that. I giggled so hard.
I agree. And it was like the quirkiest useful hobby. Like, he builds animatronic or steam-powered animatrons.
Yeah,
or
and I was
Right.
just like, this is
automatons.
adorable. And he was my favorite character.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that, in character. But...
So, I maybe just talking about the structure a little bit. Did you guys think it was well laid out? Like, I'll say from my point, like, I was like, wow, this is very much like, it was laid out almost like a TV show. I could see this very easily
Really
being
episodic.
adapted.
Yeah.
Because, like, each chapter was like an arc within itself.
Yeah. Or like each one was like a season and like 7.
Well, I don't know. Each one was a season, but yeah.
It's sections like the Temple of Light.
Right, like I take your
Yeah.
point. Like they
That
were
was
in a
like an
different
episode or
place in
two.
each section, and then they.
And that might have been why. Well, you guys remember I said at the beginning I found it a little hard to figure out what the plot of the story was, and I think that's probably why, is because we were
was a couple
doing
little
lots
plots.
of different plots. But then I thought about it, like some of the books that I read do the same thing, like the Percy Jackson series. That's basically what it is going from this adventure to this adventure to this adventure for an ultimate goal. Like
One thing I thought was interesting, and I'll probably touch on this more in the genre discussion, but it reminded me a lot of the Known Space Universe with Larry Niven's stories. Not just because part of it takes place on an orbital, and that's the ring world, essentially, on a different scale. But he does the same thing. Like, they go to the ring world, they interact with these people, and then they move somewhere else, and then they interact with these people and move somewhere else.
Yeah,
So it
that's actually
felt
very-
very similar to that.
there's a lot of like books and TV shows that go like that. So after I figured out that's what was happening, I was like, oh, okay. So now I know what's going on. I got this.
With an ultimate goal in mind the whole time.
With an ultimate goal to find the mind in this
Yeah.
one. So like, okay.
Oh, the ultimate goal in mind.
But
The mind was the ultimate goal in mind, yes.
Put that in.
To get to Char's world.
you should do sound effects, Jared, of the rim shot.
So, did anyone think that there were kind of like superfluous parts of the book? There were parts that I thought were superfluous, but I'd be curious to hear what other people thought first.
I was just so when he's on that one planet with like the really fat leader
Oh my
guy.
We song.
We saw, yeah,
Fusang,
that
yeah.
that guy. I was like I understand this is like a bump in the road to where he needs to go, but first of all, do I need to know this? And second of all, do I need to know all of this? Because this is gross as fuck.
Yeah,
That was a lot.
It was
Oh.
so disgusting.
So was anyone
I was on the plane listening to that part. I'm like,
Yeah, it was very repulsive. Did anyone else like? Okay, maybe this was just me, but when he was like crushing that guy, I was like, "Is he face fucking him?" Like,
oh my god, I was a little bit.
Joke. Okay.
I was a little bit. I'm like, he's killing him, right?
He's not
Yeah.
like, okay.
he, like they were saying that he got sweatier or whatever, and I was like,
Right.
"Oh my!" Like,
He's like, he was
Insert
lowered onto the
justification.
man's body. I'm like, to crush. Okay.
yeah, it made sense once he got off, but I was like, I think there's probably some cum on it.
Not
Just-
sponsored by George Takei.
If
you
somebody
can
looked
if you'd like.
closely.
Please follow us.
Hey girl, hey, please follow.
We broke into two different conversations there.
That's
But
what
It's
it
important
is
that
for.
we build up famous reader listenership.
Oh my god. So I will say, yes, I agree that one totally could have been cut without really subtracting anything
Anything
from the
from the
book.
story.
Superfluous. Basically, the entire prologue with the exception of 2 sentences. Can we agree on that?
Do you mean by the prologue? Do you mean the part where they're like, the mine landed on the planet or whatever?
Yes.
Like,
That's all you need to know. The mind laid on the planet. We don't need
they
to
tell
know.
you that later, in fact.
Right, but
Like,
we don't need to know every single individual part of a warship. Like, we could rebuild our own at this point. Like, it goes through, and they're just like, oh, this piece, and this piece, and this piece. And
I
it
don't know,
goes
I
on for
felt
2 paragraphs.
The whole beginning was kind of vague and confusing to me. Like, so the mind was confusing, and then when you get to the next part, like, one of my pet peeves with books is books that try to be clever by starting out with like vague openings using just pronouns instead of
Oh
just
no, I've
fucking
totally done that in my own
introducing it.
writing.
Sorry, Tony.
I'll
it
remember
drives
not to
me
try to get you to read the book that I
nuts.
did that
I
in.
think there are people
I
that
mean,
like
I'm
that and
su-
people that don't.
I'm sure there are people that like that. I am not one of those people. It drives me bananas. I'm like, you're gonna introduce me to this character, so just fucking do it. Like,
Oh, no, see, at least in my own defense, when I did it, it was a character, I didn't name him because he was inconsequential to the story.
Oh, okay.
It was literally just someone to see the inciting incident.
Okay.
Continuing off of that, though, I am really glad that the book did evolve and didn't stay at the same type of pace that the prologue set. It
Yeah.
did get better,
Agreed.
but
So, superfluous, I was annoyed that we only got 3, I think it was 3 scenes with Fal and Jace.
Yeah.
First off, I
They were
liked
totally
them.
were. I did
Oh,
too.
they were.
I wanted to know
fantastic.
more about them. I wanted them to be more involved because she didn't even seem to make any decisions that were consequential to Horza.
Yeah, because as I was getting close to the end of the book, I was like,
What's this
I
bitch
wonder
doing?
what she's doing. I like her. What's she up to?
they're
Like,
They're like, her involvement in this story was of no consequence, and here's what happened to her is she never met the character she wanted
yeah,
to meet.
sometimes, like, throughout the course of the book, I was wondering, why were, unless they factor in later books, why were they introduced at all in this series?
Right. I mean, maybe they were part of the larger universe. in the other novel, they don't mention the referrers, so they're not in that one.
But they might be in.
But they might be in other
others.
ones, yeah.
I was
In book
thinking that
two.
might be where they
Or in some of the
are.
short stories.
My thinking was that they were there to kind of give more context for the culture side of things, because really we mostly just hear about the Adirian side of things, and Horse is like
true.
harumphy about them.
That's true. I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
you
so
get
it
more
is a-
of... I guess, like I said, most of it doesn't take place inside the culture, but they are inside the culture, so I guess that's your glimpse inside that actual world.
And then I think the other thing is, like, she really expands a little bit more on the theme of identity of the book, which we can talk about later. But
I mean, like I was saying, my pet peeve wasn't that they were superfluous.
yeah.
It was that I wanted
You
more
wanted
of
more,
them
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
than we
Considering
got.
they were so interesting. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
why
I
do we
would
not
read a
know
book
more
about
about
them.
these people? Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
pretty
if
much.
her and Jace had been on this adventure with Jace being, like, kind of
Him and
vaguely
Unaha
cute.
class, like going
Yeah.
back and forth with each other would have been
Oh, that
amazing.
would have been fun.
Do not
Yeah.
disrespect Miss Fowl or whatever. Like.
Yes, yes.
The sections, I thought there, in addition to the cannibal one, I thought there were two kind of pointless sections, also kind of the foul stuff. I thought that just for streamlining, he probably could have cut out the Temple of Light, because I didn't think it was that engaging, frankly, and like...
Was it just because he needed to kill off those characters?
Yeah, but like don't introduce his characters. Like, so like really all you get from that is that like Horsley became a little more integrated to the crew. Lesbian, like
I'll
bury
talk
your
about that in my
gays,
lesbian subtext, yep.
and like and the people who survived were traumatized. Like I feel like I don't know, we didn't
But
need
it
to-
could have been a shorter
Yeah, it
scene
didn't need
to
to be
get
all-
to that conclusion.
And,
I
like,
think it was
also-
supposed to be like it was the captain's his first of many failures.
Well, but like then the mega ship, he fails on that too. So like the
Right.
incompetence point could have also been without doing. I don't know. That's just my argument. And then finally,
when we get to characters, we will talk about how grossly incompetent that man is, and also
And
just
Horva.
gross in general. Yeah.
so the final chapter I thought was kind of pointless was the damage chapter. I really liked it.
Oh
don't get me
yeah,
wrong.
like I really enjoyed reading that. Like one of my notes was like damage, weird but very interesting. Like the whole thing, I was like, this is a lot of fun. Can we do like a side novel
Yeah.
just about damage games? Like I would read that.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to talk about the characters in that too. But yeah, like in terms of the overall plot, like he could have found Craiglin anywhere, and
Is
the
that
plot
how you
would have
pronounce the
continued.
name? Just FYI.
Craiglin, yeah.
Craiglin.
Yeah, he could have found Craiglin anywhere, and the plot would have continued. You know,
That's
he could have
true.
killed them. So I was like, in terms of actual narrative structure, it wasn't.
Side note, I listened to the audiobook. They read the the Kindle version, so they might ask me how things are pronounced here and there.
We pronounce the name our way.
And I might ask them how they're spelled.
Oh, that's true.
It is.
I mean, there were parts where I was like reading along with the Kindle while I was listening to it, so I've seen most of the words, but
And let me know if I'm going on too long here, but in like speaking of the damage section, once we Jared, did you like eye roll or something?
no, I was laughing because you said, "Let me know if I'm going on too long," but you were looking at the mic like you were asking the mic for permission to continue.
I mean, you guys get interrupted.
I just kind of shrugged my shoulders because I was like, you know what? If it goes on too long, I'll just edit you out.
Oh, thanks. So I was gonna say that by the time the damage game happened, I was like, okay, are we gonna get to Shores World? Like,
yeah,
I'm ready
Yeah.
for this.
agreed. Definitely
yeah.
agreed. Yeah.
So there was a little bit too much, and that's why I think cutting out some of that other stuff would have
Right.
really helped the book feel a little tighter. And also, I just want to say, I feel like he could have pivoted. You know, like, oh, like this clear air turbulence thing isn't really working that great. Like, let me think up another plan. Cause I don't know. He seemed really fixated on that when he was in this giant port city, and I feel like he could have come up with an alternative instead of whatever. It's my 2 cents.
That's true. He could have like found other transport to Char's World. So maybe the one thing that might have gotten him back to the clear air turbulence was Yeltsin.
I think that's probably
Yeah.
why that was his motivation for
But he
getting
was
back
such an
then.
emotionally stunted dick. That,
True.
That didn't really.
I mean, the whole time he was kind of resisting the idea that he might actually care about Yeltsin,
Yeah.
but it could have still been an undercurrent.
I did have one more point. Sorry. No, I really wanted to talk about this. I liked, so the final chapters I thought were actually really well done in terms of like the dominoes that he set up. Because, you know, like the last, 4 chapters all take place on Char's World and in the command system. So I was like, okay, like, there was obviously a little bit of contrivance that had to happen. Like, oh, so convenient that helmet was covering the alarm light or whatever. I literally, like, almost put down the book at that point. Or not put down the book, but I was like, ugh.
It was an eye roll.
Yeah,
What
it was.
device?
I knew
Yeah,
this.
so there was a little bit of that, but like overall, a lot of it made sense, and I thought was like set up really well to kind of get that
true.
plot.
The only
where it
thing I
needed to be.
didn't really like about it was the jumping from character POV to character POV, but we'll get into that
Yeah.
later. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yes, go ahead, Erin. Regale us about your mushroom.
Alright, so I forgot to tell them not to put mushrooms in my stir-fried vegetable at the Thai restaurant last night, which I realize is my own fault, but I still call bullshit. Because they weren't just like those little like pieces, like round pieces of mushrooms. They were like the legit phallic-shaped mushrooms just like thrown all into my shit. I was not happy.
Even hearing that twice, the phallic shape was still really funny. I don't know why.
No,
You just
did
say
not, you did not see these mushrooms, Adam. They were legit. Jared will
Full on
tell you.
stalk and head, everything.
Yeah, they were full phallic symbolism, which was not going anywhere near my mouth.
And meanwhile, me and Meredith were eating them off of her plate.
Yeah, but you guys like those things, so.
I might have excused myself to the bathroom.
Tomato,
I've been there.
tomato.
I mean, maybe, because then you can just throw in jokes in, like, really dry parts. Out of context. And people will probably be like, what?
Actually, I had already planned on doing that without anybody's knowledge.
Kenthoven.
Excuse me.
Hot. No one said we were fancy drunk bitches.
We are cheap.
We have a martini glass on our image.
Fine.
Shipping-
I will make myself uncomfortable for the.
I pointed it in your direction so that you didn't have to do that, but then I got questioned about it.
Adam and I are loving this.
So moving on to characters. At first, I found it really hard to, like, connect with any of these characters. Like, normally when I'm reading a book, I can automatically, within, like, the first few chapters be like, oh, I really like this person, or this person is a total douche. Like, I have strong opinions about characters pretty much from the get-go, and I just did not. I did not care about most of the characters in this book. Until, like, I'd say my favorite is definitely Unaha Clasp. Like, although,
Seconded.
yeah.
Do we all agree on that?
I think we
so,
all
yeah.
agree on that. And I know, okay, so for context, the listeners, we keep saying he, but technically Unaha Clasp does not have a gender. Like, the pronoun
Drone.
that's the drone, and, like, the pronoun that uses it.
Yeah.
Most of the time. So, like, you know, because of the patriarchy, we use he as the go-to. But, yeah. Anyway.
Side note, Erin is wearing a Smash the Demon Lizard Patriarchy shirt.
Buffy
Found
the
on.
Vampire Slayer. Listen to it. Such a good podcast. Anyway, now that I've promoted them, please listen to us.
Like, follow, subscribe.
Okay, yeah. Loved Unaha Clasp. Its sassiness was...
Oh, breath of fresh air.
Love it,
like,
love it.
in
Like,
a very
as
serious
soon
book.
as it started talking, I was like, oh my god, I'm actually enjoying words that are coming out of things' mouths in this story. I really, really liked. Although, I will say, at the end of the book, like, when he gets damaged and starts talking in nonsense, I laughed the whole time. Not because I was like... I thought it was funny, but because it was like ba la 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 la, which reminded me of Big Hero 6 the whole time. Like, so every time, like, he was saying that nonsense string of letter, the B and A in LA, all I could hear in my head was
Ba la la
Baymax, ba la la. Like, that's what I heard the whole time, but...
And of course, we already mentioned his, like, adorable, the one of the two characters that survived everything. And,
Yeah.
Well, actually, three if you count the mind.
Right,
And
that's
he
true.
ended up making steam-powered automatons.
Yeah, so really, really liked him. My least favorite character was definitely Craiglin. He was
I think he was supposed to be.
He was a super gross misogynist, and every time he did anything, I wanted to, like, reach through the book and punch him in the face. It was
It's true.
a disaster. And even, like, Horza, the main character,
Yeah, he was a white version of Craiglin.
yeah,
basically,
he
in my opinion.
was quite a bit of a dick.
We get away from Craiglin for a while, so I, like, forgot how awful he was.
Right.
So when you get to the part where, like,
does
Horza's
audio
about to
diary.
kill him. I'm like, oh, Horza's actually going to kill a man in cold blood. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's right. This guy's terrible. Kill him, Horza!
I mean, he didn't do anything to Horza, really. I mean, besides make him fight in that duel to the death.
Right, like he did.
Except for that.
I mean, our first introduction to Caitlin is holding a gun to the guy's head. That's
And also, like, so a lot of the characters in here, as you mentioned, are hard to pronounce. And I find, like, when I can't pronounce a character's name, my eyes kind of glaze over them. And if my eyes kind of glaze over them, I don't connect with them. So I think the biggest, the biggest example of that is, okay, how the fuck do you say that guy's name, Tony?
Gendra Lajelli.
Okay, it is spelled, listeners, by the way, Jandralligeli. Seriously, did Iain M. Banks just plop his cat onto the keyboard and let him walk across to create some of these names? Because that was nonsense. Sorry, rant over.
I mean, there were definitely, like, Unoha Class, I made a note when he popped up. I was like, I like this run a lot, but, like, did they have to give him the most obnoxious name in the book after blah, blah, blah?
Just fill in your own name.
Honestly, when
This
he was
guy's name is
arguing
now
for his
Gene.
name, when he was like, I have a name, and it's this, I'm like, can he just call you Drone?
Yeah, because that's way better. And, like, another part that my eyes kind of glazed over was the introduction of the original company members. Because it was basically just a list of people, and I'm just like, I don't really care. And then it turns out that was fine because half of them die in the first Temple of Light battle, and then the rest die at the end of the. So it doesn't. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I was not I mean,
okay. So I'm not alone in
it
that.
probably would have been better if I was actually looking at the words, but listening to the audiobook, I definitely glazed over a lot of those secondary characters.
The
I'm like, this character was just killed by the Adiran, and I'm like, who was he again?
So I will say that, like, all of us read the book at sort of different paces. So I was blessed in that Erin, like, started the book and got to that point before me. So we did a little discussion about it, and she was like, so just so you know, when they introduce 1 million characters, most of them are going to die. So just kind of skim that section. So I did, and it was very helpful.
You are welcome.
Although at the end I was like, what was Avager's, like, quirk? Like, because, you know, the people that survived, I was like, I don't really know anything about
reading
them.
it on Kindle is you can do a search for that name. So you
Yeah,
can go back to
go
the
back
beginning.
to it,
That's what I do
yeah.
with a lot of other Kindle books when I'm reading it. I'm like, oh, this character was important in the beginning, but I don't remember who they were. They were like a secondary or tertiary character.
Oh, that's
Well,
good to
maybe
know.
on yours. My Kindle's old as fuck. I can't do that. So.
I can do that on the paperweight.
I can probably do that. I didn't know you could.
So it's great that you can like go back and be like,
can on
oh, that's
the-
why they were important.
I can do it on the Kindle app. I can't do it on my actual
Right.
Kindle, yeah.
But yeah, so I still don't know what Avager's deal was, besides that he was kind of a grumpy old man. But
I mean, that's basically all you
Oh,
needed to
okay.
know about him. Like,
Podgy Dodger.
yeah. Yeah, that's basically all
so
my
I
notes
think
about characters.
I guess we should talk about our like the other 3 principal characters who are what Yelson, Horza, and Belvita.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
so-
No, okay, so that's not true. I did actually really enjoy Belvita. Like, I thought she was... Because you never knew where she stood at
Yeah,
any point
she
in
was
time,
kinda
so she
mysterious.
was... Yeah, I really like... And I'll talk about her a little bit more in my lesbian subtext section as well, so...
Yeah, I liked her element of mystery.
I definitely got like in the beginning, she seems like important, and then she gets killed,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
like, this
I
is
definitely
definitely
put a
a
question mark
Marvel.
after that, yeah.
This is a Marvel Cinematic Universe death. You are definitely coming back.
Yeah.
But, like, the whole time, like, she's kind of, like, set up because she's part of the culture and Horza is working for the Idirans. Like, she's kind of set up as, like, an antagonist, but
Yeah.
she's not really.
Yeah, it's
like,
hard to root against
and you
her.
find yourself, like, I don't know about the rest of you, but I found myself connecting with the culture a lot more than I connected with the idea. And so maybe that's why she was such a favorite for me, was because I kind of understood her a little bit
Right.
better than some of the other ones. But, yeah.
I will say that I liked that she came back and I liked her as a character, but it was like, what did she really add to the book besides
It's
a little bit of
true.
a counterpoint?
Fun.
Because she
She added
she
fun.
literally was like restrained for half of her entire
true.
existence.
But like she was like planning things like 5 moves ahead.
She
Like you could
was.
tell. So
Like, 'cause they mentioned that one part where she's lying down in the dark room and she like feels her back tooth, and I'm like, what's in that soup? Like, is it arsenic or something?
She's
Like,
being very GLaDOS.
that's the thing from Portal, right?
Yeah. The whole
Like, so-
bound up, thinking way ahead.
yeah, so I agree that she probably didn't add a
Reference.
whole lot,
Yeah.
but she added it for me
Yes,
personally.
yes, I
I
thought-
enjoyed her.
I just mean in terms of
she was-
actual.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm just
She
saying,
was-
like personally,
Yeah, I agree.
She was definitely like the representative of the culture in the plot.
yeah.
And which I guess was important. This being his first book in the series seems so strange to me because at least the other one I read is definitely from the point of view of someone directly working for the culture, and I assumed this would be too. So I was thinking we were going to get like her perspective more, but then we're following Horza, and he's actually working against the culture because he's working for the Adirans, which was really weird because the culture is kind of set up as this ideal society that I feel like in the whole series he admits has problems, but you're still supposed to root for it. So I did think it was interesting that we're getting the other perspective in his first book.
Yeah. But maybe you would have thought differently if you'd read the first book first.
Maybe.
Like, sometimes, like, in your mind, whatever you read first is first.
And I also thought it being the first, I thought it was interesting that the culture seems so fleshed out already. Because I feel like a lot of authors will, like, build up the mythos of the story as they go in the series. But he already knew what the culture was, what its pros and its cons
pretty
were.
Planned out before he even started.
Yeah,
it's a feat.
He definitely lived in this universe for a while, I feel like, before he wrote the first one.
So I guess let's talk about Yalsa, and then we can finish with the main character.
Yalsin kind of was just the love interest. Like, she had, like, her moments where she was, like, one of the few people that would actually, like, argue against him and Craiglin on things. So, like, a couple times I was like, yeah, you fucking tell him, Yalsa.
Yeah.
Like, I did enjoy that. I did not like how her story ended.
Yes,
in any way,
I think we can talk about it in our little
In our feminism section, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I want to put out there, I did not enjoy the ending of her story.
I did not expect her to be as important as she was from the beginning.
That's
because he
I
started
thought he
off
was just going to sleep with her and then be done.
Right.
Like,
right off the bat, he's like, we'll never be more than friends.
Yeah, I actually made a note.
And I
of that
believed him in that regard. Like, usually I'd be like, oh, you two are gonna go at it hard.
I actually, like, put that in when I was making my notes about lesbian subtext. I was like, oh, so maybe he's, like, feeling something for her. Like, he's like, oh, we're never gonna be more than friends because she is. Mm-hmm. And then but I did put probably gonna sleep with her anyway. And then later when he did, I went back up and wrote, booyah, I was right.
But yeah, I liked her for the most part, although there was a moment where, like, I was like, who is this character? And she was a bit here? She was a bit, well, it was more like I couldn't get a read on her because she was serving a lot of functions in the plot. Like, she was basically the second in command.
Right.
But she was also the love interest.
Right.
And she was also, like, one thing that, like, bothered me was when Horace was like, oh, well, Yalsa would be so mad if I killed Alvida. And I'm like, why? Why would she care? Like, literally, when you got on the ship and it was revealed that you had killed Craiglin, she was like, shrug. Like,
she really was, yeah. She's a mercenary.
Who cares?
So, yeah.
Maybe it's just because she didn't like Craiglin, but he thought she liked... Because he said something about, like, they see, like, Alvida was getting a rapport with the rest of the crew members, and that all of them would be irritated if he killed her. And I was like, but would they really?
But, like, really early on, he's like when she first joins the ship, he's like, oh, I don't think Yalsa would like it if I killed her. And I was like, why? Why would she care? She's a mercenary.
And she's known this chick for, like, an
5
hour.
Minutes. And you told her she's, like, an enemy agent.
Yeah.
It struck me as plot convenience.
You had some, like, good reasonings for it that I'm sure if you had told her, she would have been like, oh, okay, yeah.
And then so now I guess we can talk about Horza.
Horza's an asshole. Like, I don't think I've ever read a book where I dislike the main character quite as much as in this book.
It was interesting.
Which I think
the whole time I was like, this is going to make for an interesting discussion when we just ask the question, how did you feel about Horza?
Which I think that's a bold move to make your protagonist such an unlikable person.
I agree, yeah.
Horza actually reminds me a lot of some of the characters in his position in other science fiction stories, like in a lot of, like I said, Larry Niven's novels. There are characters that are like, I'm doing the practical thing, even if it's kind of amoral, and some people
Logical
might die
yeah.
as a consequence, but it has to be done because he's working for what he thinks is a greater good.
Mm-hmm. Ah, yes, collateral damage.
Right. He doesn't really stop to think about the collateral damage. And there's
even
other
if he
characters
does,
like that.
Care.
In like the known space universe in Alistair Reynolds' books, there's a lot of that. Like, I'm joining in with these pirates or these mercenaries, and they're really amoral, and there's a lot of collateral damage, but I have an end goal to get to.
That's actually quite like the Admiral in Ender's Game.
Yes.
Where Ender kind of just went with it, and the Admiral's like, oh, all those people? Yeah, fuck them. We're going to win.
There also might be potential spoilers for other books and TV series.
I'm just saying, in general, there are a lot of characters like this in science fiction, where they have practical concerns that they're and end goals they're trying to get to, and there's going to be a lot of collateral damage.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just thought I would put that out there as we get into discussions about other... culture things, like, we'll try our best not to spoil things other than this book.
I actually have a really interesting question about Horza that I wanted to get your all's opinions on. So giving a little extra backstory on this, that we mentioned earlier that Horza is a changer, that he changes himself to fit into different societies, different situations and stuff. But does Horza as himself really exist anymore? Can you go through that many changes through your existence and still hold to yourself?
We do have a whole section about identity. I thought we were going to get into.
I think that's like the central question the book is asking in some ways.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
So do we want to get more into it when we get to the identity section?
More into
and you
that
can
later.
you can just move that section.
Yeah.
Because that question is definitely like you're beat over the head with it when you get to his like dying words.
I didn't really like pick up on that identity was such a key part of the book until like the millionth like introspection section, and then it was like it was the damage game, I think, where he's like, "Who am I?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So clearly they're leaning pretty hard on this identity theme.
Right, but so yeah, we'll get into that when we talk identity.
So
Any more on character?
I mean, do we want to specify like who Horza is, where he comes from, and what he's doing? Because like Horza, you said. So Horza is a changer, which is a species that comes from this asteroid. They're humans, humanoid, humanesque. I like that. Humanesque.
I just called them shapeshifters in the synopsis.
Yeah, like their thing is that they've had so much genetic engineering done to them that they can actually manipulate their own image, and so they get hired by other races to impersonate. They get hired specifically by the Adirans to impersonate these other beings. Like he starts out on the one world with the Thorpen, yeah.
Also,
the gerontocracy of Thorpen.
What is?
The whole shapeshifter thing. They had the shifter race.
Oh, yeah.
There's actually a line where they suggest that other races hire them too, because like in
I'm
Horza's
sure, yeah.
backstory where he's like, I killed those rabble rousers, which I did not agree with. Like, who was he to kill those people? Was he a government agent that whole time? Anyway.
Yeah, they do kind of gloss over that.
Yeah.
But the changers are kind of scattered, it sounds like, and few in number these days.
Well, they said in that section that the Academy, or whatever the ruling body of the Changer asteroid was happy with him killing those people because it basically allowed it. There wasn't an uproar. They stayed where they were, and the Changers were employed more than ever, or something like that.
Yeah, but they still had to punish him, so they had to exile him.
So I took it to mean that they were basically like the spy race of the
that's like. That's definitely the role that they serve, is they get hired by these other species, like the Adirans. And, like, throughout, I mean, now, that's, like, part of the plot, is that he's changing throughout the story to impersonate the captain, Craiglin. And I thought it was kind of funny, like, when he finally does get the chance to beat Craiglin, he's Craiglin for all of 5 minutes before Balveda exposes him.
Yeah,
I'm like, well, that was
funny.
A lot of lead up, and, like, he like...
That was a lot of lead up for not a lot of follow through.
I mean, it was amusing to me, because he took all that time to learn how to sound like Craiglin, to get into Craiglin's basic shape so that he could, in, like, one changer trance, change his face into Craiglin and become Craiglin convincingly enough that Yeltsin actually even believed it. And, like, after all that workup, when he finally becomes Craiglin, he's Craiglin for 5 minutes, and Balveda comes in and she's like, yeah, that is Horza.
Y'all are idiots.
So, 2 more notes I wanted to make about character. I want a Sarban the Eye spinoff, like the millionth spinoff I want of this book. Like, I'm so curious about, like, her deal. And did anyone else like her?
Oh, I love, like, the beginning, like, spiel she goes on about the damage game. I'm like, I was laughing actually through that part. I'm like, it was, after a lull, I was glad to get to that for some comic relief.
Consider Phlebas, the book we're looking more into getting a spin-off than continuing the actual series.
Oh my god, it's true. And then I really just want a spin-off of the Damaged People, because I took notes on all of them, and they're uniformly ridiculous. So I don't know if anybody else remembers these, but let me just read some of the descriptions. There was the guy who replaced his face with a mask, not because he had any damage to his face, because he wanted to be a better card shark. There was the guy who throws money at people because he has too much. Also has fancy pheromone-enhanced concubines that give people hard-ons. And a weird creature that he pulls around on a chain with emeralds for eyes. He took out the eyes, by the way. It's not a creature with actual emeralds for eyes. And then there's the warrior woman with no breasts, who Craiglin doesn't like because he's an asshole. I was all about Xena, titless Xena over here.
That's staying in.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was the quote-unquote diseased, half-blind, incontinent, and albino kid who carries around a stuffed animal. And to me, he sounds like a dystopic version of an anime trope. Like, the hyper-competent, like, kid who carries around a stuffed animal and is really good at, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or whatever. Like,
Yes.
Probably true.
Or like Sabrina with the doll in Pokemon.
so, okay. That's my spiel. Oh, and another damage anecdote. So, I will say that my, like, all-time saddest characters in the book, I thought, were those little clawed beasts that were, like, clawing each other over the damage arena.
Oh,
They just
yeah.
kept giving us an update on for some reason.
I know!
Right.
Stop!
I was like, stop it!
They were this much bloodier, and then this much bloodier, and now they're dead.
And it sounded like they were kind of dancing, or it was like a romance, and then it turned dark. And I was like, no! And nobody was even watching! Why did they do this?
I
And this is the
agree,
culture,
I
too.
agree.
Like, this is Vavash. It's supposed to be part of the culture at this point.
I mean, not necessarily because it's the damage game, which is illegal.
Oh,
in
that's
the
right. That's
culture,
true. It was
so-
said it was banned.
It still felt like bullshit. Like, no one's even watching them kill themselves. Like, I made a really sad face when they did that. Anyway.
Okay,
So
shipping.
shipping. So for those who are not familiar, shipping is a fan term to indicate when you are rooting for like a pair plus of characters to get together. And frequently it's like non-canon pairings, but it can also be canon pairings.
So, is there anybody you all ship?
I don't know if this was obvious or not, but Fal and Malveda.
I will be talking
think-
about it in my lesbian subtext
Did you-
section. Yes.
Can I say
Okay.
why? Cause
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I
a little
won't.
obvious,
I
just-
don't have a lot of in depth about it, but I do mention it.
okay. So Fal and Malveda. Fal, of course, is the referrer who is on the other side of the galaxy from where the action's happening with her drone caretaker. She's the like super smart woman who can figure things out that sometimes the minds can't. So they watch her carefully and basically employ her to figure things out. That's who Fal is, and she mentions a few times that she thinks Malveda is exciting.
And wants to
She's-
meet her.
Yeah, she's the SC
No,
agent
yeah.
on the other side of the galaxy who's so cool.
I was really sad when she didn't get to.
I know, they specifically gut punch you with that at the end. Like, she
Yeah.
never met her.
And I was like, but they could have had such a beautiful
But,
relationship.
and then, like, my heart cracked a little bit when you hear, like, the rest of Fal's story, because Fal eventually becomes an SC agent. So I'm like, oh, she took inspiration from Malveda.
She also did about a million other things. I was like, I want to read her life.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that was mine, was Fal and Malveda.
No, I
She
agree.
changed
100%.
gender several times.
She changed gender several times, which I bring up. Yeah. Like I said, I didn't really like engage too much with these characters, so I didn't really care who they ended up with. Like,
I mean,
so-
I definitely wasn't like that into Horza and Yalson. It was just kind of a thing
mostly
that
because
happened.
Yalson could do way better than
She
him.
could, and it was just kind of like a shrug. I guess he needed to get his dick wet at some point in the book, like.
Yeah.
But as kind of
Which
like
is also a weird trope. Was like, why can't he just like not have? Why can't a
Sex,
character
yeah.
just not have it? But whatever.
So I will say that two kind of like joke pairings that I thought of were Wubslin and the Train, because
Yeah.
Yes!
that was
yes.
definitely the book's real OTP.
Agreed.
And
He stayed behind for that train.
he did.
He died for that train.
He did.
And it was all for nothing.
Oh, God.
I'm glad you
And it
guys
was
got such a
pointless
kick
in
out
the
of
grand
that.
scheme of the
Is anyone
universe.
else, like, now seeing the train going into tunnels?
Oh my god. Like, oh yeah, you
Like,
penetrate
there's
that.
an image in my head now. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, leave it to Adam to give images of penetration in people's heads.
A little bit of Skiddy on Wheel Lord action going on there.
Yeah, definitely.
I was really hoping we would find a way to use that trope in this podcast. Thank you, Adam, for that.
And there we are.
So the other pairing, and this would just be kind of like a kind of crack fic, like, or like a non-consensual kind of fic type of deal, would be Avager and Zozarl, or however you pronounce that Adiran's name, who like took him hostage and then crushed his skull, but took him hostage and could have like raped, and then could have like raped him in the.
Okay, if we could not do non-consented rape, that
No, I'm
would
just saying.
No, but-
maybe.
Look, the non-consent part, but I get his
I
point
don't
because
know.
he's sitting there listening to all his stories, all of the Adiran stories.
Yes.
I just non-consented rape her kind of.
Forza
Yeah,
and
it's
the
true.
Nimbus 2000.
I'm just saying, I would read a. Kind
So I was
of,
thinking
like,
when you mentioned the
non-consensual-
train, I'm like, Snape and the Nimbus 2000.
2000.
Forza and the
The
Nimbus
best
2000.
Harry
It
Potter
could be a
pairing of all
crossover.
time. Other than James and the Giant
I was
Squid.
gonna say Forrest and the Giant Squid. Let's throw that in there too. Giant space squid.
Right?
I didn't have one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't give a shit about these characters.
Yeah, no, Jared and I were on the same
God.
wavelength.
I'm gonna be
really
blatantly
enjoyed your
honest
past
about
pairings,
this.
Though.
I mean, like,
very much enjoyed those.
one that I guess is kind of canon is that they mention Jace and Fowl.
Yeah, I was
'Cause,
into that.
Like, he specifically says that Jace is recording Fowl's laugh.
Yeah,
Like,
he's clearly in love
"Aw."
with her.
A little stalkery, but
I actually wrote that, like, this could be a question. Is this stalkerish or is it aw? Is it adorable?
Yeah.
That is like.
because it's a robot, it was cute.
I think that's the $1 million question in a lot of things. Because
Right?
referring back to Harry Potter, there's a couple moments in there that I'm like, oh, that's really sweet in a stalkerish kind of way, but still sweet.
Lesbian subtext.
Lesbian subtext.
Okay, speaking of shipping.
All right, speaking of shipping and lesbian subtext.
Erin's lesbian subtext corner.
Can you add like a cat meowing or like a purring sound effect?
Yes!
Because that would be amazing if it was like Erin's lesbian subtext corner.
Agreed.
Here, kitty.
Okay, so I really thought I was going to have to reach to find any sort of lesbian subtext, but was pleasantly surprised to find out that wasn't the case. At first, I was just kind of noting that some of the female characters were being described in masculine terms, because as we all know, straight women are never masculine. But then I came across actual lesbian subtext in the characters of Gao and Key Alsorphus. The quote from the book is, Gao and Key Alsorphus were the two women who kept themselves so much to themselves and were alleged to do things, quote unquote, when alone in the cabin, which seemed to annoy the less tolerant of the company males. That is, most of them. So the way their relationship was described got me thinking about whether these two women were actually together or if the company males just assumed that two women who prefer to spend their time with each other and not with, quote, less tolerant, unquote, men were automatically lesbians. When Key Alsorphus was killed in the Temple of Light, spoiler alert, Gal was so distraught she ended up killing herself. Right, that isn't necessarily concrete proof that they were romantically linked, as you can be distraught at the death of anybody you have a close relationship with, but I think they probably were. The death of these two probably queer characters brings to mind the bury your gays trope, sometimes referred to as dead lesbian syndrome, that's come to the forefront of cultural conversation lately, especially in LGBT communities. However, Gao and Key Alsorphus are not the only characters that die during the course of this book. Actually, basically everyone dies in this book. Trope name, kill 'em all. So does this anybody can die style of storytelling make the death of two queer characters okay, or is it just a way to get around the discussion of positive queer representation?
I will say that this book was written in what year did you say, Jared? 1981? 82. So, yes, probably a way to avoid talking about queer characters, but
I feel like he mentioned them to be edgy and then swept them under the rug as soon as possible.
Thanks for name dropping us, Iain M. Banks.
So I guess my question was like not just for this novel, but just like in general, when people use this kind of was like, well, yeah, the queer characters died, but so do everybody else. Does that make it okay, or are they just using it as?
I mean, they definitely died early in the plot so that they didn't become inconvenient.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that particular instance is problematic. Or were you talking about the trope in general?
Both. Anything.
I mean, I guess my defense of it is that when you actually sit down and do the logistics, like, usually one character in a given queer couple is more popular than the other, and, like, so you kill off that less popular character to give the more popular character new love interests, new storylines, because people in happy relationships are boring, and people don't like it when their queer couples are fighting. So they just kill one of them off. Not defending it, just saying from a narrative.
The rationalization.
Yeah,
of
from
it,
a narrative standpoint, I see
Makes
why they do
sense.
it sometimes.
Yeah, so I just thought it was interesting in here. Like, I didn't think about it until I was actually making my notes. Like, when I read that they, were allegedly do things, I just automatically assumed. But then I was like, well, maybe they're not. But these men just think because they don't want to spend time with them, they've got to be gay. Which is actually an attitude that people have in real life. If a woman doesn't, spend her entire life chasing after men, she must be a lesbian. Anyway, moving on from that. So there's also some less explicit lesbian subtext in the character of Valveda. She's described as handsome and with short black hair, which, incidentally, guys, I also have short black hair, so,
It's a lesbian trait.
So it's it's kind
Clearly.
of a lesbian thing. All right. Anyway, she doesn't have a romantic relationship with anyone, so it's entirely possible she could be queer. She even uses the word gay to describe herself at one point in the book. The quote is, she's talking, she says, 20 years at my mother's side, more than I care to think of, as a gay and dashing young blade, indulging in all the pleasures of the culture has ever produced. So my question is, do you think she meant gay as in homosexual, which is the way we refer to it today, or gay as in happy, which is the kind of historical definition? And if this is taking place in our time of like the 1300s,
That's actually really interesting because, like, I feel like the book was trying to really set up this kind of vague romance between her and Horza, or this star-crossed lover
Yeah.
thing, and wasn't really working for me. So that actually makes a little more sense that she like respects him, but she's like hearing her described as handsome and dashing,
Yeah.
like, and
It might be an interesting point to note. I feel like if Iain M. Banks was writing this today, he would absolutely include gay characters in legit marriages and fully out and talking about it. But since it was written in the 80s, I feel like he had to be subtle. He felt like he had to be subtle anyway.
right.
I feel like it could be a hint to that. I definitely do agree there was like a star-crossed lovers thing going on between, because they're very
Which is
much
what
like,
I was thinking,
we don't want to kill each
too.
other, but we're on different sides of the war.
That's essentially what I was thinking too. But there were like these little bits and pieces about the way she was described and the way she
Yeah.
talked about herself that I was like, I mean, okay, so we're also getting into the thing. Like, she could be into him, but still also be queer. Like, that is still 100% a thing that can happen.
hearing her say she participated in all the
Pleasures, the culture, yeah.
that suggests like pansexual to me.
Oh yeah, and think about how easy it is to do things like change your sex in the
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
because it mentions that Fal does it on multiple
Yeah,
occasions.
actually, that's my
Yeah.
next. That's my
I
next
think-
Oh,
note.
sorry. You can cut that if you don't want to
I
have
will
me preempt it.
I do kind of wonder if, like, when was the last book in this series that he wrote? Like, if he gets more explicit about, like, same-sex relationships in later books. Because, like, he mentions, I think there's a line in there about, single sex-oriented people or whatever, like, implying that, like, a lot of a not insignificant number of people are bisexual or pansexual or what have you.
Yeah,
Omnisexual.
I'm just using, like, queer as kind of a
Yeah,
blanket term.
queer.
I
It
don't
is an
know.
article.
I just, and like I said, where the culture seems to be this like ultimate liberal, free society,
Free love,
so-
whatever, yeah.
So I feel like
Damn hippies.
if he was writing it today, he absolutely would have just straight up said there are queers all throughout.
Yeah, there would be
This
queers
society.
all over this, all up in this bitch.
Every spectrum is fully explored.
Yeah,
But
no,
he had to
that's
be
probably
subtle
true.
because
Just
the
wrapped up
society
very
was
nice.
less liberal
Queers
than
all
he
over
was
this.
writing it for.
All right, so the last character that I wanted to very briefly mention was Fowl. So she doesn't have as many overt descriptions as some of the other characters, but she seems to be quite good at processing, which I don't know if that's a lesbian thing or if that's a culture thing. And she seems to have an interest in Valveda, which we're talking about during the shipping section. So in the epilogue, it's noted that she changes her sex multiple times, so it's entirely possible she's also queer. Does anybody else have any thoughts on...
That actually kind of opens up an interesting question. Was she changing her sex just kind of to try something new, or was it because she was already gender non-binary, or like was she already feeling that, or did she just want to try something different? And maybe did she change her identity to match the gender when she changed physically? Because I imagine in something like the culture, you might be able to tweak the neurons to change the identity along with the body. Maybe she was a cis woman as she chose to become a cis man, or was she gender non-binary and she just went back and forth body-wise?
And there's also, it's not entirely clear on whether this is something she can do specifically, or if it's something people in the human-esque characters in general can do. Like, can everybody do it, or is it just
I'm pretty
her?
sure they can. I assume it's like a genofixing thing.
I assumed it was like a medical procedure that's just easily available in the culture.
Well, like, it seems like they can do a lot with the genofixing. Because, like, at one point that we will discuss soon,
Yeah.
when Yeltsin is
I
talking about
actually
her,
do want to bring that up in
when
that
Yeltsin is
discussion,
talking about
yeah.
her pregnancy, she's like, oh, I could just, like, abort it or, like, stop it from growing altogether. It's like,
Like,
oh.
just
yeah.
with my mind,
So
which
it's like-
is in my notes.
So I feel like you could grow a penis or,
You could
grow a vagina
probably-
You could
or
control
grow whatever you
your own
want.
biology.
Yeah.
To answer your earlier question, at least going by Goodreads, the latest book in the series that I see is The Hydrogen Sonata
Hydrogen sonata.
It's the 10th book in the series, and it came out in 2012.
So yeah, it probably has some games.
Oh, that sucks. That means he probably still had other books.
Yeah,
in
he had
line.
one gestating. Well, did you guys
He
see-
died in 2013, listeners, in case you're wondering why we're...
Yeah.
So total diversion, but I was really sad that I can't remember her name, the chick that writes the alphabet series, you know, like A is for,
Oh,
yeah.
her.
It's a thriller mystery series, and she got to Y, and she was working on Z, and then she died this past year.
Oh my god, that's awful.
Wait,
Sue,
who-
her name
what?
was like Sue
Grafton,
something.
I
Sue
think?
Grafton, yeah. She was doing the alphabet series, and it was like,
Oh.
She
B
was
is for
literally
ballistics,
working
C
on
is
the
for-
last...
yeah.
Oh.
And
Please
like,
tell
and,
me there's a ghostwriter that's publishing
no,
that.
sure.
Like,
so
No.
actually her family like is respecting her wishes and is, which we'll see how long they like.
Oh,
want
she
those-
specifically asked that it not be finished?
Yeah, something like that.
They should
Which
release
I call
She hadn't even started working
bullshit
on it. I think like she was about
Yeah.
to start or something along those lines.
one more in the series and you're not going to let people release it,
Yeah.
really?
I mean,
That sounds very much like, you know, in the biblical story. It was like, oh, you saved up all your money. Who will have it now? You'll die tonight. It's like she kind of tempted fate by creating the series that had a specific ending to get to.
yeah, it's like this is the year you die. Anyway, total diversion.
we can cut that out.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Cut that.
Or move it.
Alright, so is there those were all my notes for it. Is there anything else anybody wanted to talk about?
I mean, like there was maybe a little something about Vita and Yolson if you really wanted to read
If
into
you
it. I
really
guess.
squint at it. Which, you know, like, as queer people, we are used to really squinting to find representation and things. So that's a fair point. I did a little bit think about that, especially considering at that point I thought that maybe Bavida was queer. So, but I was so distracted by Yalson's gross thing with Horza that it never really...
And that has been lesbian. Ah, fuck.
That
fuck's
has
sake.
been lesbian. That could actually be funny, and that has been lesbian.
Now, shut up and sit in the corner while we finish.
The woman had her piece, let the men talk. And that leads us into feminism.
So that was Erin's lesbian subtext corner. Thank you, Erin.
And with that, we're going to bring our inaugural episode of Drunk Queer Bitches Talk Books to a close. Today's episode was part 1 of our discussion of Consider Phlebas by Iain M. Banks. Be on the lookout for part 2, which should be available shortly. We'll finish our discussion of Consider Phlebas and let you know what book we'll be reading for our next episode.
Join us next time when we have.
A new book.
New stories.
And most importantly, new drinks.
Until next time, and please read responsibly.
This has been Drunk Queer Bitches Talk Books. Our music is Fuzzball Parade by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. You can find us online at dqbtalkbooks.wordpress.com or on Twitter and Instagram at dqbtalkbooks.
All right, now what are we doing? What's next?
Plot. You've got the gay agenda.
I do have the gay
Do
agenda.
you want a pen so you can like cross?
You
them
got
out?
the agenda! Like,
Let me pull up.
Maybe not cross them out because we'll use that as like an outline for next month. Like it won't be exact, but maybe like a check mark next to what we've discussed.
Actually,
take a
mark them
picture
off.
of it.
Huh?
Cross it out. Did you not hear her?
What?
I
Just
said
put-
don't cross it
Just
out,
put
actually.
check marks because we're gonna use it as kind of a. I mean that probably doesn't matter. I doubt we'll post that again, but
Take a picture of the whole thing.
We gonna put that in our
We've got a
scrapbook.
pristine version. Before you check things,
What?
take a picture of it.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Wait, didn't we get a picture last night?
Of the gay agenda, not
This
of the...
podcast supported by the phrase, oh, for fuck's sake.
I'm going to say that often, and,
And I will be editing most of that out.
well, I might just sneak them in on you. So.
I
In the
became
middle of
the
Erin
workhorse
saying
of the
something
group.
very astute. Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay, we have a
That was
picture
gonna
of
get
it.
left in because that was gold.
It's getting hot down
it's
here.
getting hot
In
in here.
here. So take off all your clothes.
Oh, I did want to say this a little bit. Okay. While looking at the Goodreads page here, I noticed that the top review of this book actually comes from none other than Felicia Day. So I'm sure if
yeah.
Iain M. Banks were alive today, he would be thrilled to learn that his book was thumbs up by the ingenue of Dr. Horrible Sing-Along blog.
I met her. She drew tits in her book for me.
Did she?
Yes, she did. With her
I was gonna say I
signature.
didn't like her in Dr. Horrible, but...
Well, that's because her character was not great.
Yeah.
I was about to say she was an ingenue. What do you expect?
Yeah, no, I got her to write in the phrase "Behold
She's the
me"
love
from a
interest,
movie
don't
that she
dress it
was in,
up.
The Adventures
What's
of
that?
Link.
I said she was the love interest, don't dress it up.
Right.
Alright, so settings, yep.
Oh.
Okay, so
Wait, please finish chewing.
Yes.
I'm
So,
sorry, I got distracted.
famished.
Are we done?
Is this an acceptable time for an oh for fuck's sake?
Oh, for fuck's sake.
That is my word!
We should get it in unison, everybody. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Okay, are you ready?
Back to the podcast.
Back to Sony.